But I am going to ask you about the Fed balance sheet. You've written about this. I would suggest it is a fear in some camps bordering on hysteria, and you seem to face this debate about lowering the Fed balance sheet, the balloon up during the crisis. You seem calm about it. Are you calm about it intellectually?
Yeah, no, I'm quite calm. I mean, I think there are legitimate questions about how big it should be ultimately, and we can talk about that, of course, but there seems to be no concern, certainly not much visible in markets, that the unwinding part is going to be very difficult. The whole strategy of the Fed is basically to, at some point, stop reinvesting maturing securities and let it run off in a very quiet, passive way, and I suspect that will be received pretty well.
When the concision of your thought, what you lead to always is within a paragraph, distinctions, and you've got an important distinction within the balance sheet upward. Educate our audience about the word to shrink passively, and that there's different ways to shrink, and you make a key distinction there.
Well, sure. The balance sheet mostly consists of U.S. Treasury securities and mortgage-backed securities, Fannie and Freddie securities backed by U.S. government. Those are obviously, private sector type and private securities that are owned by the Fed, and they have a maturity. And at some point, each individual security will mature and run off. And what happened was that earlier on in the process of expanding the balance sheet, we began to say, well, look, we don't want the balance sheet to decline in a passive way because things are running off, maturing. So we began the process, this is back in 2010, whenever a security ran off, we took the proceeds, we reinvested it in new securities, so to keep the size of the balance sheet unchanged. Right. And so since October 2014, when the Fed stopped buying securities, the balance sheet has basically been fixed size, with all maturing securities having been replaced. Now, what they're eventually going to do, according to their explanations and many speeches and the minutes and the like, is that at some point, probably end of this year, beginning of next year, they're going to say, well, from now on, we're going to not replace all of the maturing securities. We may replace half of them, for example, whatever they decide. And that just means that without actually selling anything or taking any active decision, the balance sheet will very gradually, over a number of years, just begin to shrink back down towards something more sustainable.
And folks, within a Courage to Act, the photos are absolutely extraordinary, and particularly the family photos of the Bernankes of Europe and particularly of Lithuania. There's a wonderful, lonely photo of you taking lunch with Tim Geithner, where I'm sure you had lots to talk about at the time. Maybe you didn't even eat, you just talked to each other about what you're going to do in the ugly media. Within that was the glide path from 2007 to when the balance sheet was done. Do you have a date where you would think we would get the balance sheet to normalcy? Is it 2 years out, 5 years out? Is it 20 years out?
Well, the Fed has released a lot of simulations or projections of what they think it will do, and of course it depends where they decide to end up. I think the best guess is something like 4 or 5 years after they begin the process of unwinding to get back to some kind of sustainable level. And so again, I think that it's not going to be a huge problem. And one reason, though, they waited until this point to begin the process is if it does end up tightening conditions a little bit, raises interest rates a little bit, then they have raised the short-term rate, the federal funds rate, enough away from zero. So if necessary, they can wait, or even if necessary, cut a little bit to offset whatever effect the balance sheets have.